Oliveira Lawyers. Today, Sunday, September the 28th, 3:33 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. I'm very happy to see we have lots of viewers getting started with us. And as typically, you have a priority to post topics of your interest to be discussed. And yes, we're going to go over as many as we can. And we have Edgar Richardson. Nice to meet you, Edgar. Edgar is saying, Bom dia, Edgar. I'm a new client at your firm. I will be traveling to Rio de Janeiro next month. And I was hoping it would be enough time to get all my documents in order to file for retirement residency. I'm having trouble obtaining apostille and translations of documents. Can your firm help with this matter? The process seems complicated and time-consuming. Yes, Edgar. Some of them, they are more straightforward than others. For instance, if you have, Social Security, if you're using Social Security as the driving income for your application. So what we're going to need is like the statement for the Social Security, as well as the bank statements for the draws that you are receiving into your account. So we're talking about those two documents. There is a third one that is like proof of the capability of wiring funds abroad. This one is going to be a letter from your bank. There is another strategy if the bank refuses to give you the letter saying that your bank account has the capability of wiring funds. There is another strategy, but this is typically what we recommend. There is also the background check, okay, for the retirement track. You can have something from the state level, or the FBI background check as well, right? So to some extent, yes, we can help you with the apostille services, and not sure where you are in the process. Now, in a month timeline is usually challenging. But yes, if you want me to give, like a shout at our team and say that you are planning to come in the next month and see as much as they can get done, Edgar. One strategy, right? One strategy is like to get as much done as you can while you're still in the United States. After you leave the United States, we still have an office in Dallas that could receive your documents, okay? That's very common for the birth certificate, right? So for the birth certificate, we can basically not do much because the birth certificate in the United States is typically reserved for the person themselves, right? Like not for third parties. So you would need to order the birth certificate, but what you could do is to have our address to receive the birth certificate. Once we get your birth certificate, then we can send to the apostille service provider, who would get an apostille on the birth certificate, send it back to our office in Dallas, and from Dallas we would send to Brazil. So that's the strategy I see over here in order to make your trip, next month feasible, Edgar. I hope that helps. Matt Gaines. Hi, Matt. Oi, Dr. Oliveira. From Matt and Adrian. Good to see you both, Matt and Adrian. You mentioned last week that a person can import a vintage motor vehicle more than 30 years old. Can you elaborate? Do they charge 110% of the value? So I was explaining, Matt, that there are blank prohibitions for a bunch of things in Brazil, right? So it's not just about tariffs. There are blank prohibitions, such as for any car that is not new, meaning used, and not as old as 30 years of age, right? Now, if you're going to import like a vintage car, then there is no such prohibition. And the tariffs, they change over time. So I am unable to tell you how much it would be charged. The 110% tariffs it could be possible, right? Not exactly just as a tariff, but if you probably combine all the cost components for importing the car, I would say I would expect, right? And that's just like a rough estimate. I would actually expect the importing fees to be way over 110%. Very typical of Brazil, all right? Very typical of Brazil. But if once you hire our service, like we have a few providers for importing services, right, that we connect you with to help you with your journey towards Brazil. And then they could potentially give you an accurate estimate, right? But you can also, try to get a few quotes, like upfront, like you could search for, customs broker in Brazil, right? That's typically the term that they use, like customs broker, or, importing and exporting broker in Brazil, right? You could identify some of them, and then instead of just asking for an estimate in abstract, maybe to have a target vehicle, right? Like this vehicle is 35 years of age, and the market value is, I don't know, like 30 or 40 or 50,000 US dollars. Can you tell me how much this is going to cost me deliver to Brazil, meaning including not only the tariffs, but the transportation, the brokerage, and everything else. But my rough guess, Matt, is that it would be way over 110%, because if it was just 110%, even without making any calculation, I can tell you that there would be a huge market in Brazil for people to bring used cars, vintage cars from the United States, and to sell in Brazil, okay? That's just my feeling. I may be wrong, but that's my take on it. We have a vintage aircraft in 1956 that we want to keep and fly in Brazil. Got it. Yeah, so, the blanket prohibition for importing is typically 2 cars. I'm going to be honest with you, Matt. I don't know much about importing airplanes to Brazil. There may be even less of a blanket prohibition for you to bring small aircrafts to Brazil, and the recommendation is the same, right? Like to bring this to Brazil, but in terms of tariffs or overall cost, I would assume it should be something substantial. I don't know, something between probably 100, 200% of the market value. Okay, very typical of our market, Matt. I hope that was helpful. Marisa Navas, boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Estamos em família assistindo sua live. In Spain, Marisa, Ricardo, Arthur César e Clara Luz. Thank you so much. We have a whole family in Spain. They are watching our live stream. So glad to hear from you, Marisa, Ricardo, Arthur César, and Clara Luz. Thank you for the audience. Thank you for your support. General Principal, boa tarde, obrigado, Luciano. Welcome, General. Good to see you over here. Question: what is your experience with acquiring real estate in Salvador and or Bahia? Are there problems or traps that potential buyers should watch out for? General Principal, through Fall Brazil, we face 2 main challenges, right? And those challenges, those 2 main challenges are going to be the lack of title insurance, right? So when you are buying in the United States, basically there is an insurance policy that you buy. Many times it's paid by the seller. It may cost you like $3,000 to $4,000, and this insurance is gonna assure that the buyer gets a good title, right? And why is a title important? Because if you don't have like a safe title or a solid title, a third party could come after the property even after the closing. So in the United States, 99.99% of the people, they don't ever consider that they could buy something, pay good money, attend a closing, and still not get the thing, right? So it is just not part of the U.S. market. But we don't have a title insurance in Brazil. So in Brazil, whenever you're buying a property, even when you are dealing with a reputable real estate agency, nobody is going to pick the tab if you mess up in terms of the title. Okay, so that's the first challenge. And the way you're going to mitigate that issue is that you're going to have someone, going overboard in terms of due diligence, right? Like, I mean, due diligence should go way beyond of what real estate agencies do in Brazil. You should go, way beyond, and that's what we typically do over here, right? Like whenever clients are, working with us, they typically have a realtor, and on top of that, they have our service to solve those issues. So first main issue, lack of title insurance. Second one is going to be, believe it or not, lack of escrow. Okay, so escrow in Brazil, even though there are some attempts of getting like escrow solutions out there, they are not meaningful by any measurement. All right, typically in Brazil, a seller is going to expect you to pay first, and then seller is going to transfer title to you. Of course, you're not going to pay the seller before a purchase agreement is signed, due diligence is completed, there are certificates of clearance on the table. So it's not just like you sending money to someone just hoping for a property to come your way. There are many, many steps that should be completed first for you to then send the money. And then again, once the seller receives the money, that's when they are going to transfer title to you. Now, what we do to cover the second issue, we're going to use typically a currency exchange bank in the transaction. You're going to be sending the money to the buyer, right? You're not going to be sending the money to the realtor. You're not going to be sending money to us as your attorneys. You're going to be sending the money directly to the seller. But because you are using this partner of ours, currency exchange bank, we can tell the bank, listen, bank, general principle is sending the money to buy real estate. So you're not going to release the funds until the day of the closing. Okay, so what we do is like we kind of emulate an escrow, right? It's not a real escrow because there are no escrow terms in the transaction. It's more something that we are coordinating with the bank, with you as the buyer, with the seller, and kind of releasing the money around the time of the closing. All right, so these are the two main concerns. Now, if you're asking particularly about Salvador and Bahia, what we see is that how can I say, people are more creative in terms of selling real estate that should not be sold. Okay, and when I say creative, I'm not talking, it's not like a nice, polite way of saying fraud. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like for the local standards, people are going to try to sell properties when typically they would never try to do so in a more mature market such as São Paulo. Okay, now very interesting. If you compare Rio de Janeiro to Bahia, they are more on the same level, right? So even though Rio de Janeiro is like a neighboring state to São Paulo, a huge state like Rio de Janeiro and the city of Rio de Janeiro, still they are very creative, right? Like when trying to sell property. So what I can tell you is whenever you are assessing the market, if you see a property that is substantially lower in price than similar properties, 99% chance there's going to be something related to this property that would impact on your ability to gain title, right? And many times they're going to be selling a property that has, for instance, a legal lien, right? Like meaning that the property is entangled in litigation. Many times they're going to be trying to sell a property that's still in probate, okay? They are going to be selling property involved in public officials corruption cases, so they kind of freeze the property. They cannot sell, and they say, well, but I have more assets, right? So I can go to the judge and say that I'm gonna, give some type of, like a deposit here, so they're gonna release the property to you, right? There are all types of situations that we've seen in the past, not only in Salvador, Bahia, but throughout the country, in which we see those types of situation, right? And whenever you see that, typically the seller and the realtor is say, well, but that's normal, that's how it works over here, and that's how things work, right? And we don't typically buy that, right? If you're paying good money that you worked hard for, we think you shouldn't be guessing if you're going to get the title, if you're going to get the property or not. But these are, if there is a component specific to Salvador, Bahia, a general principle, that's it, right? People are more creative when trying to sell properties that they should not be selling, okay? So it's not like plain fraud. It is just like, the famous, the so-called jeitinho brasileiro, right? They want to, find, they want to cut corners to get faster to that moment in time in which they are going to get the money for the property, okay? So I hope that was helpful. Virgílio, boa tarde, doutor. Aqui, boa tarde. Dominican Republic, right, Virgílio? Good to see you again. And glad to see all this participation. Keep the participation going, folks. Don't slow down. I'm very happy whenever we have like an active audience. And let's take a look. Let's take a look at the news. All right, that's Estadão. All right, that's the newspaper that I've been sharing with you guys. Estadão is a 150-year-old newspaper based in São Paulo, okay, but covering news on a national basis. And the main headline here says, o plano de Milei naufragou? Para analistas, eleição de outubro definirá futuro da economia argentina. Right, so here they're talking about President Milei, and they're saying that, Milei's plans, it looks like they may have sinked. And to analysts, an election in October is going to define the future of the Argentinian economy, right? Like Argentina is not like a huge country, but by South American standards, Argentina is a meaningful partner to Brazil, a meaningful country for South America, right? So that's why you typically see news related to Argentina in Brazilian newspapers as well. And, not surprisingly, right? Like many subtopics linking Milei to President Trump. So Milei is like supporting Trump and questioning the existence of the United Nations. That's one of the sub-headlines over here. Trump is going to meet with Milei, right? So it's so interesting. So even when Brazil is talking about a neighbor country, it's still like, the United States is going to, like the news saying, is going to be living rent-free in Brazilians, minds, right? Brazilians, they cannot help. You cannot see a half page of a major Brazilian newspapers without a bunch of things about the United States, right? It's a kind of complex relationship because many Brazilians, even before Trump, right? So that's not because of Trump, but even before Trump, many Brazilians would kind of hate the United States, but it's a kind of love-hate relationship because they are going to be bad-mouthing the United States in the morning. And then, in the evening, they're going to be watching, TV series, and they're going to be, watching movies from the United States, and they're going to be, researching about cars, about, stuff from the U.S., a very interesting and complex relationship. But that's typical. For those of you who are following us over time, you know that whenever we check the news, almost always, like, probably 8 times out of 10, you're going to see news from the United States, above the cut. That's very impressive, right? Like, I mean, whenever you see news about Brazil in the United States, I'm sure it's the exception. I don't know, maybe one time out of 20, right? And in Brazil, is the exact opposite. Whenever you don't see news about the United States above the folder, that's the surprise. And you can see over here, right? Like, even with the pictures, right? The Secretary of the United States mentions Brazil as a country that needs to fix their commerce or their economy or their international business. All right, so interesting. I really like to share with you guys because I think it does speak volumes to how attached our culture is to the United States. All right, let's go back to our participants. Craig Smith. Boa tarde, Luciano from California. Good to see you, Craig. General Principal, thank you, sir. Very helpful. You're very welcome, General. Keep the participation coming. Let me also share here, as some of you have asked, about Remax Nomad States. Here is like a short ad about the agency that is located in Rio de Janeiro and can help you guys locate properties of your interest, not only in Rio de Janeiro, but across Brazil. Okay, and if you wanna, take a picture or a screenshot so you can contact later, this is the agency that we're partnering with for clients who need a realtor to assist with finding an ideal property. They are Remax, right? Remax comes from the United States. I'm sure you know about that. So this is specific agency because Remax in Brazil is just like in the United States. You have a bunch of operators. Naturally, they need to follow certain standards. So it's good. It's a good start, right? No matter which agency you're dealing with in Brazil. But this one in particular, we are kind of sharing the typical standards that we work here with at the firm, and they are kind of also educating the realtors in terms of which properties would qualify, for instance, for the Brazil investor visa. All right, there you go. We have a Matt. Matt is asking, as a U.S. citizen who is planning to move to Brazil soon, I sincerely apologize for how Trump is treating Brazil. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for your kind words. I can tell you one thing. That it is hurting our business. Okay, it is hurting our business because since the beginning of the confrontations between Brazil and the United States, some people naturally are getting concerned, right? Like, you're gonna, move to another country. You are from the United States, and you don't know if they could start to create problems for U.S. citizens. So I can tell you that we are on the same page in terms of not wanting for that to happen, right? And you are free, to talk about President Trump. It's your president. We just wish, to things to get better ASAP, okay? Because we are suffering as a business as well. Matt, thank you so much for your kind words. All right, let me take a look at our backlog here. All right, so in terms of U.S. companies in Brazil, are there any changes because of the current political climate between Brazil and the United States? Well, look, such a coincidence, right? And listen, not that I know, right? I think that everybody is waiting for this thing to go away, for, the relationships between the two countries to be restored ASAP. And as far as I know, there are no major changes, right? Like for companies that are already established in Brazil, right? But if things continue to be like that, like there could be naturally an impact to companies from the U.S. as well. Now, just because I was actually discussing about that with my wife, whenever I am in the United States, right, like just comparing, companies, right, like that exist in Brazil and in the United States, right? There is one in particular, McDonald's. We have McDonald's in Brazil, I would guess for, probably over 5 decades, right? Because I grew up going to McDonald's and I'm over 50, so I guess they've been in Brazil for at least 50 years. And something that's very interesting, right? Like if you are in the United States, typically you're gonna have with your coffee, you're gonna have either milk, you're gonna have a cream, you're gonna have something else. And I'm not talking about Starbucks fancy type of stuff. I'm just talking about the core basic of coffee, right? Like cream, sugar, sweetener, and believe it or not, right? Like in Brazil, if you try to get milk at the McDonald's, it's actually an ordeal, right? And McDonald's, I don't know why, in Rio de Janeiro, they are typically ill managed. Like they are not really well managed like McDonald's elsewhere. Like if you go to São Paulo, McDonald's operations, they're very, well kept, very, fast. Same thing, for instance, just to talk about another extreme, like state from a geographical position. If you are in Ceará, if you go to a McDonald's in Fortaleza, I never had any issues. But in Rio de Janeiro, there is something with the leadership of McDonald's in Rio that messes up with the dynamic. And so in Rio de Janeiro, I tried to get milk in a McDonald's, and it took me, believe it or not, I think, 15 minutes to get milk. Okay, because when I ordered, like when I said, listen, I want a coffee with milk, the cashier, she didn't know how to place an order for milk with coffee, right? And to start with, you don't get milk, right? You need to buy milk, okay? So if you order coffee at McDonald's and after that you say, well, and by the way, I want a milk in my coffee, you don't get milk. Then you need to go back to the cashier and say, you know what, I forgot to tell you, I also need milk. And then she's going to need to enter like an amount to pay for the milk that you're going to have in your coffee. And because basically nobody asks for that, they're going to need to call the manager. So the manager is going to tell the cashier how the cashier is going to input the amount for the milk. And after that, they are going to try to make sense of how to put milk in the coffee, believe it or not. So, it's so interesting. When you compare this to the United States, right? In the United States, I mean, it's just standard to have, free milk or to have a free cream, or, when you're using the totens, like to place an order, you can also tell what you want. Not so much in Brazil, okay? But there was more like, a sharing. And let's take a look at what else we have over here. All right, any trends for the U.S. dollar in terms of exchange for Brazilian reais? Like, I mean, is the U.S. dollar pickup power is going to increase in value again? Right, so it's difficult for us to assess if the U.S. dollar is going to continue to drop in value. Over the course of the last few months, the U.S. dollar has dropped in value when compared to the Brazilian real, right? Now, very difficult for anyone to forecast what's going to happen. Typically, what we say here, to prospective buyers of real estate is like, no matter the current level, is still much better than like a year or a year and a half ago, right? So don't worry, at least as of now, even though you didn't buy when, a single US dollar would buy 5 reais and 90 cents, nowadays the US dollars is still buying 5 reais and 30 cents, right? So it's not that bad. It's still good. If I was planning to buy a property in Brazil, I would do so with this currency exchange rate that we have today. All right. Let me see what else. Okay, I will just ask you guys if you want to just ping me on the chat. I just want to make sure our chat is working as it should and that is not freezing. It did happen in the past, like I was, talking by myself for a long time before realizing the chat window was not working. Okay, so if you could ping me now, just so I am sure the chat window is working. All right. And let's take a look at another participation question here from our backlog. All right, Matt Gaines, test chat. Appreciate it, Matt. Thank you so much. All right, picking up something else here from our topic. All right. Okay, so digital nomad, can I apply for a third time? Yeah, that's a common question as well. So the digital nomad visa is still like the most common, longer term visa available. It's like what we call a bridge visa. It works really well for someone to come to Brazil, just for a year, test the waters, and if they like, try to get something more longer term. When this visa was created back in 2022 under the Bolsonaro administration, it was designed to give foreign citizens a single year plus a second year as a maximum period of 2 years. And after that, as you know, President Lula took over, and President Lula is interestingly is allowing people to apply for a second renewal, right? So we have many people, many of our clients actually getting their second renewal as we speak. So they applied for the first time, they renewed once. They renewed twice, meaning that they are on their third year, okay? Now, whenever you review the so-called normative resolution, right? That's a literal translation of the legal support for the digital nomad visa. When you read the Resolução Normativa, it says that it should be renewed once, okay? And that future legislation would address, like the future renewals, right? And there was never like an additional regulation addressing the digital nomad. So it's like the renewal is more like on this kind of limbo state. And because of that, the federal government is basically just working on the automatic, saying, you know what, like if people are applying for renewal, we give the renewal as long as they are meeting the requirements. That's our take on it. But naturally, nobody can tell you for how long that's going to work. All right. So from a legal perspective, it should be renewed for just one term. In reality, like we are getting many clients with a second renewal. All right. Okay, let's take a look at what else. All right. Can you tell us, like, is there a better, state for cost of living? What should I pick? Preferably a state that's not very expensive. Okay, so, it really depends. Like Brazil has like continental dimensions, right? It's almost like, a continent, right? Like just to give you an idea about size, Brazil is actually bigger than the United States if you remove Hawaii and Alaska, right? So the continental United States is smaller than Brazil, just to give you an idea about how big Brazil is, right? Like, I mean, if you combine the entire European Union and multiply by 2, it's about the same size or even smaller than Brazil, right? So Brazil has continental dimensions. There are so many destinations that you can pick. And for those destinations, naturally, you're going to have different levels of cost of living and also like public safety as well. When you're talking about cost of living, typically the norther you go, the lower is going to be the cost of living. Okay, so if you're comparing, for instance, right, 2 major tourist destinations or foreign citizen destinations in Brazil, if you compare, let's say São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, or Florianópolis to the northeast of Brazil, like Fortaleza, Natal, Recife, João Pessoa. Those cities, like in the northeast, they are going to have a substantially lower cost of living than, cities in the southeast of Brazil, like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Florianópolis. Now, interesting to note that when you think about the south, not necessarily they are going to be much safer than in the north, right? Like, I mean, Florianópolis, it's pretty safe, in my opinion. Is much safer than, the average in Brazil. Now, in São Paulo, particularly if we're talking about, the central São Paulo area, unfortunately, nowadays is not being considered very safe, all right? Like Rio de Janeiro, I would say it was worse in the past in terms of, public safety. Nowadays, I feel very safe in Rio de Janeiro, right? I remember when I was in my 20s, I was based in São Paulo. I would travel to Rio de Janeiro. I would be concerned about safety, believe it or not, in my 20s, right? Because you couldn't go here, you couldn't go there, if you make a wrong right turn. And nowadays, it's kind of the opposite, right? Like whenever I'm leaving Rio de Janeiro and going to São Paulo, I say, well, now I need to, be careful with my phone. Like I cannot use my cell phone in public or, like when I am in downtown or I am, walking down the street, like you should not use your cell phone in São Paulo. Rio de Janeiro, unfortunately, I would be careful as well. And in the Northeast, like, I mean, if you are, in most of the areas, like I wouldn't be concerned with that. Okay, so just sharing here some components, some information in terms of safety and cost of living. All right, let's take a look at what else is going on here. All right, marriage. Okay. Marriage, like, is it customary for Brazilians to support each other before the marriage? I have a friend who told me that's weird. What is your opinion on that? Okay, that's an interesting topic. So, so in the Brazilian culture, like, it's not really common for, people in a relationship other than marriage to support each other. Okay, that's something we see happening very often with foreign citizens, particularly with U.S. citizens, right? Maybe because U.S. citizens do have access, to a compensation that, when compared to the international standards, is typically in the higher range. Right, so many times, we have a consultation, and the person is going to say, well, like I have, a Brazilian boyfriend, or I have a Brazilian girlfriend, and like I'm sending them like $200 or $300, $300 a month. Some are sending $500, some are sending $1,000 a month. And just because this money doesn't make me much of a difference for me, but it does make a huge difference for the Brazilian romantic partner, right? And that's the kind of thing I see happening very often. and but that doesn't happen as often between Brazilians, right? Maybe because money is gonna be more scarce for both sides of the relationship, right? Like for both Brazilians. But in our culture, is not really common, right? Like I'm gonna give you another example. Maybe it's gonna help me convey this concept that I'm trying to address. In the United States, it's very common for people to buy someone else a drink, right? So if you go to a bar and you want to buy, someone else a drink, typically it's like something playful, or it's typically welcome, even if there is not going to be anything between those two persons. Buying someone else a drink is welcomed, right? In Brazil, unless the other person has a clear interest in you, typically they are not going to accept you to buy them a drink. Okay, just because I think it is not as natural in our culture as it is in the U.S. culture. So in the same way, in the United States, maybe someone needs money. This person has a friend, or this person has a romantic partner. The romantic partner is going to help, to pay the bills. In Brazil, it's going to be very weird for a Brazilian to see, a U.S. citizen doing so, right? Of course, not to us, like because we've been, working cross-border for so long. So we just, say, listen, whatever works for, for our clients, like we're going to advise in the best manner we can. But yes, I would agree that in Brazil is not as common for people to support someone else, who is in a romantic partnership financially, right? It's a kind of weird from our culture, right? Just that's what it is, okay? Matt Gain is, we plan to live near Porto Alegre. What is your opinion of the area? Matt, I think Porto Alegre and Rio Grande do Sul in general, they are great areas, great choices, right? So the south part of Brazil, right, like starting with Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul, they are in average safer than the rest of the country. An advantage of picking something like, Porto Alegre is that Porto Alegre is not like a beach coastal area, okay? Because when you go to the coastal area of the southern states, they're going to be more expensive, okay? Like if we're talking about Camboriú, Florianopolis, there's so many beaches, right? Like in these areas, so many coastal cities, and those coastal cities, they are substantially more expensive than cities more like in the countryside of the state. So Porto Alegre has, a couple of advantages, right? Like first is a big city. Second is the capital of the state. Third is in the south, which typically is safer than, states more up north of Brazil. So these are some of the upsides, right? Like a downside, Matt, and that's something you can, avoid just by, choosing the right property. Heating is not as common as you would expect in a place that gets very cold in the winter, right? And I like to joke, like I've been to, like Santa Catarina so many times, not so many times to Rio Grande do Sul, okay, because it gets very cold. And I had an experience in my 20s, right? Like I went to Bento Gonçalves. Bento Gonçalves is like a small city in Rio Grande do Sul. They rely a lot on wineries, like they produce a lot of the good wine from Brazil. They are from Rio Grande do Sul. And so I went there to spend a week with a close friend of mine that was in my 20s. And, like in the third day of my trip, I decided to go back to Sao Paulo because I could not stand the weather, right? Like it would be something probably around, in the 30s. I'm talking about Fahrenheit, right? Not like Celsius. I'm talking about Fahrenheit. So it was about 30. Very, very cold. And there was no heating system. So it wouldn't matter how many layers of, clothes I would be wearing. I would be suffering. I would be feeling really, really cold, right? So just factor that into your journey in terms of how you and Adrian pick the property. Just make sure that it has a more modern take on the heating system. So when it's really, really cold in Porto Alegre, which is typically the case during winter time, you guys are not going to have this type of situation, okay? And typically what people are going to do, they're going to bring a bunch of electrical heaters nowadays. But then, it's not ideal to heat up your place with, electrical systems. Ideally, you would have a more longer term solution for heating, if you will. All right, Matt. Now I see. We actually love cold weather. No, so there you go. You're doing your homework, right, Matt? You guys are doing your homework. You're picking the right area because yes, Rio Grande do Sul is all about cold weather. There you go. And it gets good and it gets warmer in the summer. So, the good thing about the south of Brazil is that you have those well-defined seasons of the year, which kind of resembles what you see in the United States, right? Now, if you pick something like Ceará, right? Ceará, that's a place in which I am very often, okay? And in Ceará, there is no winter whatsoever, right? Basically, when it's winter, it's when it's raining a lot. So just because of the, the raining, it gets colder. But I don't think I ever got a temperature lower than 50 degrees in Ceará, right? 50 degrees in Ceará. It's already cold. It's just fun. You see people, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they're going to be, wearing jackets, sometimes gloves, right? And all sorts of clothes. The word is ending, right? Very interesting, reaction that you see, for a temperature in the 50s. And I'm not talking 50, sometimes 55, 57. And people are, really having a hard time adjusting to the temperature. Now, 55, if you're talking about Rio Grande do Sul, Porto Alegre, sometimes you can get this temperature, I'm not sure in the summer, but easily in the fall or autumn, 55 all the time, right? And for the winter, sometimes, what we call sub-zero temperatures. We're talking about Celsius, not Fahrenheit. But so the sub-zero would be, I guess, under 32 Fahrenheit, right? And you get that a lot. So Ceará, even São Paulo, I don't think I ever saw snowing in São Paulo, but it does happen a lot, actually, in Rio Grande do Sul and the Porto Alegre area. It's not snowing like you would see in the United States, but it's still snowing, right? So there you go. Okay, let me take a look at what else. All right. So letting you know, our next live stream is going to be on Wednesday. Okay, on Wednesdays, we meet a little bit earlier in the day. We meet at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time, and it's about lunchtime in Rio de Janeiro. You are welcome to come to our YouTube channel and click on the notify me button. So when the live stream is starting on Wednesday, you are notified about the live stream. I want to say thank you all for your participation, and I'm gonna end today's live stream. Thank you for the participation and wishing you a blessed rest of your Sunday.